In regard to this quote, Dr. John Gresham Machen of Princeton writes, quote, "When Justin refers to the birth of Perseus as a birth from or through a virgin, he is going beyond what the pagan sources contained. There seemed to be no clear evidence that pagan sources use the word virgin as referring to mothers of heroes, mythical or historical, who were represented as being begotten by the gods," unquote. In regard to the last quote, which reads, "For when they say that Dionysus arose again and descended to heaven, is it not evident the devil has imitated prophecy?" Here Zeitgeist misunderstands Justin. Zeitgeist claims, quote, "The devil had the foresight to come before Christ and create his characteristics in the pagan world," unquote. But according to Justin, Satan didn't anticipate Christianity by looking into the future. He tried to copy from the ancient Hebrew prophets, and according to Justin, Satan misunderstood the prophets. Notice that Justin says that the devil has imitated prophecy. We can see that Justin doesn't really have the devil looking into the future to copy Christ at all. He has just imitated prophecy from the old prophets, according to Justin. So Zeitgeist is false when it says the devil had foresight. Also, the supposed resurrection of Dionysus is post-Christian and from the 2nd century. Justin was writing in the 2nd century, so he most likely was not referencing pre-Christian sources or belief, just current post-Christian belief. As for proof Justin was referencing Old Testament prophecy and not looking into the future, Justin writes, quote, "And these things were said to both among the Greeks and among all nations, where they, the demons, heard the prophets foretelling that Christ would specially be believed in, but that in hearing what was said by the prophets, they did not accurately understand it, but imitated what was said of our Christ. Like men who are in error, we will make plain." First Apology. Zeitgeist misunderstands Justin and doesn't apply proper context. They then bring up Joseph of the Old Testament saying, quote, "Joseph was a prototype for Jesus," and then proceed with listing supposed similarities. Let's examine their points. Miracle birth. Only in the story of Jesus is the birth by a virgin, and is the child considered divine. 12 brothers, 12 disciples. Zeitgeist plays word games to trick the viewer into believing there is an actual parallel. However, Joseph was one of 12 brothers, which means he only had 11 brothers, while Jesus had 12 disciples. Jesus was not one of the number of disciples, while Joseph was one of the number of the brothers, so this is not a parallel. Sold for 20 and 30 pieces of silver. Judas did not sell Jesus, he betrayed him for a price. Joseph, on the other hand, was sold as a slave. Judah and Judas suggest a sale. As previously pointed out, Judas did not sell Jesus. In the story of Joseph, Joseph is sold as a slave. Such behavior is not scholarly, nor is it conducive to those who are looking for any kind of honest assessment. Work at the age of 30. Okay, this is completely false. Jesus did indeed begin his ministry at the age of 30, according to the New Testament, but Joseph began his work of predicting things through interpretations of dreams at 17, not 30. Again, Zeitgeist is being deceitful. So if scholars were to use this line of criteria for evidence, I would make a prediction. Consider the following parallels between Lincoln and Kennedy. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846, Kennedy in 1946. Lincoln was elected president in 1860, Kennedy in 1960. The names Lincoln and Kennedy each contain 7 letters. Both of their wives lost their children while living in the White House. Both presidents were shot on a Friday. Both were shot in the head. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both were succeeded by Southerners. Both successors were named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939. Both assassins were known by 3 names. Both names are comprised of 15 letters. Booth ran from a theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald ran from a warehouse and was caught in a theater. Booth and Oswald were assassinated before their trials. Before Lincoln was assassinated, he visited Marilyn Monroe. Before Kennedy was assassinated, he visited Marilyn Monroe. One can begin to understand why parallels have not persuaded the majority of today's scholars. Aside from Zeitgeist's parallels being wrong, parallels mean nothing. Zeitgeist then attacks the historicity of Jesus and the extra-biblical sources, where they make the false statement that only 4 sources are typically used. They list Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, and Tacitus, and say they only say a few sentences at best. This is a false statement. Tacitus wrote a long statement on Jesus and Christians in the Annals. Tacitus not only referenced Jesus, but we can learn a lot from his writings. For example, Christians were named for their founder Christus, who was put to death by the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. His death ended the superstition for a short time, but it broke out again, especially in Judea, where the teaching had its origins. His followers carried out a doctrine to Rome. When the Great Fire destroyed a large part of the city during the reign of Nero, the emperor placed the blame on the Christians who lived in Rome. Tacitus reports that this group was hated for their abominations. These Christians were arrested after pleading guilty, and many were convicted for hatred for mankind. They were mocked and then tortured, including being nailed to crosses and burnt to death. Because of these actions, the people had compassion for the Christians. Tacitus therefore concluded that such punishment were not for the public good, but were simply to glut one man's cruelty. So Zeitgeist is being very deceitful when saying a few sentences at best, and it only references Christos, which is not Jesus. Obviously it is Jesus if you read Tacitus. They reference Suetonius. Suetonius writes, quote, "Because the Jews at Rome caused continuous disturbances at the instigation of Christos, he expelled them from the city. After the great fire at Rome, punishments were also inflicted on the Christians, a sect professing a new and mischievous religious belief," unquote. From Suetonius we learn of the expulsion of the Jews from Rome, and that it was Christ who caused the Jews to make the uproar in Rome, apparently by his teachings. The second reference includes the use of the word mischievous to describe the group's beliefs, and the term Christians to identify this group as followers of the teachings of Christ. As for Pliny the Younger, his letter is so lengthy I have to summarize here. He states, quote, "They, the Christians, were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to God, and bound themselves by solemn oath, not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust, when they should be called upon to deliver it up, after which it was their custom to separate, and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind," unquote. From Pliny's letter, we find several more facts about Jesus and early Christianity. Christ was worshipped as a deity by early believers. Pliny refers late in his letter to the teachings of Jesus and his followers as excessive superstition and contagious superstition. Jesus' ethical teachings are reflected in the oath taken by Christians never to be guilty of a number of sins mentioned in the letter. Concerning early Christianity, we see Pliny's method of dealing with believers, from their identification to their interrogation and to their execution. For those who denied being Christians, worship of the gods and emperor gained them their freedom. Pliny's inquiry received a reply which is published along with his letters. Although Emperor Trajan's response is much shorter, he states, quote, "The method you have pursued, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cases of those denounced to you as Christians is extremely proper. It is not possible to lay down any general rule which can be applied as fixed standard in all the cases of this nature. No search should be made for these people. When they are denounced and found guilty, they must be punished, with the restriction, however, that when the party denies himself to be a Christian, and shall give proof that he is not, that is, by adoring our gods, he shall be pardoned on the ground of repentance, even though he may have formerly incurred suspicion. Informants without the accuser's name subscribed must not be admitted in evidence against anyone, as it is introducing a very dangerous precedent, and by no means agreeable to the spirit of the age," unquote. So when Zeitgeist says it's only a few sentences and it doesn't reference Jesus, they are way off base. In fact, if I were to read every passage about Jesus from outside sources, it would take a very long time. They bring up Josephus as being a forgery. There are good indications that the majority of the text is genuine. There is no textual evidence against it, and conversely, there is very good manuscript evidence for the statement about Jesus, thus making it difficult to ignore. The vast majority of Christian and atheist scholars conclude that Josephus did write about Jesus, not only in the brief statement concerning James, but also in the longer account. In 1972, Professor Shlomo Pines of Hebrew University in Jerusalem released a study on the Arabic manuscripts containing Josephus' statement about Jesus. It includes a different and briefer rendering of the entire passage. David Flusser of Hebrew University in Jerusalem stated, It is quite plausible that none of the arguments against Josephus writing the original words even applies to the Arabic text, especially since the latter would have had less chance of being censored by the church. In addition, Flusser notes that an earmark of authenticity comes from the fact that the Arabic version omits the accusation that the Jews were to blame for Jesus' death, which is included in the original reading. James H. Charlesworth of Princeton concludes, quote, "We can now be as certain as historical research will presently allow that Josephus did refer to Jesus, providing corroboration of the gospel account," unquote. So no, Zeitgeist isn't up to date with modern scholarship on Josephus. We actually have around 42 sources for Jesus within 150 years of his life. Pliny the Younger, Tacitus, Suetonius, Josephus, Thallus, Lucian, Marabar Serapion, Valentinius, Phlegon, the Gnostic Gospels, Celsus, Tertullian, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul's writings, Hebrews, Jude, and 1st and 2nd Peter. As Dr. Gary Habermas and Mike Licona write, quote, "Tiberius Caesar was the Roman emperor at the time of Jesus' ministry and execution. Tiberius is mentioned by 10 sources within 150 years of his death: Tacitus, Suetonius, Paterculus, Plutarch, Pliny the Elder, Strabo, Seneca, Valerius, Maximus, Josephus, and Luke. Compare that to Jesus' 42 total sources in the same length of time. That's more than 4 times the number of total sources who mention the Roman emperor during roughly the same period." In regard to those who gripe about the Gospels, historian Michael Grant writes, quote, "But above all, if we apply to the New Testament as we should, the same sort of criteria as we should apply to other ancient writings containing historical material, we can no more reject Jesus' existence than we can reject the existence of a mass of pagan personages whose reality as historical figures is never questioned," unquote. Now, nearly 100% of scholars, atheist and Christian, agree that Jesus lived. Most atheist scholars grant the crucifixion and empty tomb as well, such as Gerd Ludermann of Germany and many others. Only fringe scholars like Acharya S. and her camp say Jesus never existed, and as we have seen through films like Zeitgeist, they lie to get their message across. Of course, Acharya's and Zeitgeist's conspiracy theory would not be complete unless they point out the perpetrators. They need to show who is responsible for assembling all this information of pagan gods and astrological information from around the world, and explain how and when they met up to write the first ancient biblical manuscripts and started Christianity. In Acharya S.'s book The Christ Conspiracy, she frantically insists it's the Masons. Now, I have studied Masonry and the New World Order thoroughly, debated the subject, arguing for a Masonic conspiracy which started in 1776, and even made a documentary film concerning it, so I absolutely know Acharya inside concedes there is no real physical data to support her outlandish theory that she proposes. So in her book on page 283, she asks herself, quote, "Where were these ubiquitous Masons when Christianity was being formed? Why is there so little mention in the texts of time? They certainly existed, as it was they who were erecting massive and magnificent edifices all over the globe. The Masons were there, perpetually hidden behind the scenes," unquote. So in other words, she has absolutely no evidence for her theory, and without this crucial part, the Christ conspiracy doesn't work. She provides no objective documentation that these supposed ancient Masons built all these massive structures in the world, or even existed at all in antiquity, and she is vague in describing which structures she is even referring to. If she means the pyramids, how would a few Masons be able to make a pyramid? Think about it. That would take thousands of people. Even with that many, we still have no idea how it is even possible to build the pyramids. She says the biblical Nimrod who built the Tower of Babel was considered the first Mason. But it doesn't matter if modern society or Freemasons say he was a Mason. You need data, and for that claim there is none. One must understand, all that Acharya is offering is legend. Masons have no proof Nimrod was the first Mason. He built a big tower that Masons imitate. So what? That doesn't prove he was a Freemason. All she can offer is quotes from fringe authors who have no evidence themselves, or quotes that don't even support her thesis. I contacted the historian and Freemason Rich Rodriguez and asked him the following questions. Is there any actual data that you are aware of that gives evidence for Nimrod actually being the first Freemason, as in he started the group, or is that just legend? Also, Hiram and the handshakes, is there any data that you know of that says the handshakes were actually done by him, or is that legend? Rich responded and simply said, quote, "It's all legend." So, although Acharya writes as if she is presenting fact, she is presenting nothing of the sort. Acharya cites Thomas Paine, Origins of Freemasonry, but the accepted term for hundreds of years was simply masonry, or operative masonry, because they were merely craftsmen and guildsmen. It wasn't until 1717 in London that they were even known as Freemasons. Some would say the late 16th century at the earliest. It was at this point Freemasonry allowed anyone to join, and not just craftsmen or guildsmen, as it had been previously. And it wasn't until 1776 that Freemasonry was involved with any big conspiracy. Adam Weishaupt and his order infiltrated Freemasonry. Before then, there was no Masonic conspiracy.